Hello, everyone, and welcome to Counterpoint Quick Take. Today, I have my colleagues Varun and Tarun with me, who will be discussing Apple's recent developers conference that just concluded. There were a lot of announcements, especially on the software side of things, and Apple really saved the best for the last when they really took about 45 minutes to talk about Apple Intelligence, or as we all know it, artificial intelligence, and how Apple is really bringing a lot more to the current market in terms of what we're seeing for Gen AI, artificial intelligence in general, and how it all fits into its ecosystem. Something really cool, I think, and what they're really pushing forward for the industry, really. Tarun, let's start right there. How do you think this Apple Intelligence is really playing into Apple's strategy and what they've announced so far?
Right. Thanks, Maurice. Yeah, I think first of all, everyone was surprised, like when the name came out, and that's something only Apple could have done, right? So the putting the entire narrative from AI to Apple Intelligence, right? So that was good, but for me, the key takeaway and the repeated push what Apple did throughout the entire conversation was personalized AI experiences, right? And although on the looks of it, it looks a very generic statement. Okay, personalized experiences, what exactly are those? But I think that is something that is going to shape the entire narrative and the experiences on the iPhone even to next level, right? So what we have been looking at entire all these years, we were very much accustomed or aligned towards our smartphones, like we were revolving around this gadget. Now what Apple is highlighting or hinting that you can make your phone personalized as per your needs and preferences. So basically the key takeaway from the first couple of minutes interaction when they basically outline the entire strategy is we are going to make enter into the AI space, but it is going to be more personalized. So what exactly is, you have a tons of data that is already there on your device. So what Apple is looking at is just specifically talking about iPhone is how is that data on your device going to help you to navigate or elevate the entire iPhone experiences. And obviously the entire personalized thing is now being tagged with the privacy, and these two combinations are making or hinting that Apple is on its way to take that entire AI narrative in a very different way where it matters. So for example, if you have data, you have tons of data on your device, and if it is secure, it will help consumers in a big way. So that was the key takeaway. Number two was more on the privacy side, and the third is what they are seeing is the meaningful use cases that are emerging out of it. I think by referring to the Siri and the partnership with the OpenAI, they hinted that open AI models are going to exist, and given a chance, Apple will obviously rely on some of them, but then there are certain things related to giving your privacy control to them that they have highlighted. So these use cases are likely to develop over a period of time. So I think for me, these three things were the key takeaways. But over to you. Like I think you have been, Maurice, you and Varun have been tracking that space uh, equally very closely. So, have you seen those kind of discussions already happening in US, maybe? And then Varun, I know, has been looking deeper into the use case side of things. But Maurice, coming back to you, how are you seeing this initial responses coming from the US or the advanced iPhone users over there?
Yeah, I think you kind of really nailed it on the head when you mentioned that, there was such a strong focus on the smartphone initially, especially, us industry analysts talking about how Gen AI is going to be developed in the smartphone going forward. And, a lot of the current Android OEMs having certain use cases being enabled on their phone. But I think what was really clever by Apple is they really flipped the script on what Gen AI means, right? It's not just taking your magic eraser or something like that and just deleting something from a picture. It's really getting that all encompassing aspect of Gen AI and really leveraging. And what Apple does so good about this is their ecosystem here and being able to have all these components in there and have it be more of a compelling use case overall for the consumer. So I think that's what's really exciting, especially for users. iPhone iOS 18 is only going to come out for the 15 Pro and Pro Max with these Gen AI models. So these are going to be the power users being able to really harness Apple's full capabilities with these Gen AI models. And I think that's, a really much more compelling argument for Gen AI as we've seen it right now. And, of course, Apple has a leg up there just because of their ecosystem approach that they have. Do you have anything else to add to there, Varun?
Yeah, sure. I think you guys have summarized it very nicely. Just a couple of things. So there was a lot of anticipation about Gen AI, and Apple really had to make a very strong statement about generative AI. Yes, they have arrived, and naming it Apple Intelligence, we'll have to give it to them. So Samsung had really gained a head start in the generative AI, and what they had done very nicely is they had picked specific use cases, and they had done a lot of marketing around those specific simple use cases. For example, circle to search, right? And it resonated with consumers very, very nicely and given them a very, very nice head start. It also helped in educating the industry about the Gen AI as well. So this Apple Intelligence, I think, in the similar way, will resonate with the consumers very nicely in the coming years. It's going to Apple is going to really create a messaging around it, which will make it very, very simple to understand, and which also resonates with their so-called personalized intelligence, right? So this Apple Intelligence, I think we'll have to give it to them. And the second thing for me is, if you look at the use cases which they presented, right? You look at the text editors, or you look at the image generation. This is this is not something groundbreaking or something extremely new which they have launched, right? But what they have done differently is how they have weaved it nicely across the entire ecosystem, and then obviously added that privacy angle to it. So Apple has always been saying what happens in iPhone remains in the iPhone, right? That has been their narrative. And when it comes to Gen AI, it's entirely an opposite story. It cannot really happen in your phone, right? It has to happen on the cloud as well. As Tarun always says, that Gen AI is always going to be hybrid. So weaving that narrative around the entire privacy thing, answering all those questions and speculations, I think it will give you a lot of trust to both the developers as well as the consumers, that yes, their data is going to be safe. And yes, even if they use generative AI, be it through chat GPT or be it through Apple's models, their data is still going to be safe. So it's going to go a long way in democratization of this technology, because if consumers are trusting this tech, it's going to take off, and then obviously the use cases Apple will champion it.
Right. Very, very interesting. So one point I think, Maurice, you raised and one you touched upon is what are the underlying strengths, right? If you look at the brand and when they are doing something, entering into a segment or adopting an industry trend, everyone does it in a different way. Like we have seen in foldables, it's all about Hinge, right? And AI is all about models like LLM and everything. I think the beauty of the entire announcement lies in the fact for Apple, they also control this silicon, right? So they have this the in lot of skin in the game when it comes to the silicon, and that gives them a confidence. Okay, in future we can run these models because we know that how to optimize our hardware or the silicon to a level where all of these can run seamlessly on the device. I think this is one distinct advantage which no one has in the industry, right? So that end to end, Google is trying with the Tensor, and then Samsung has to a certain extent with the Exynos. But the kind of deeper integration what Apple does is is something that will help them a bit. And the second thing, what I understand from this, it is something very similar to what we saw in this Steve Jobs era when the entire this app thing started and no one really anticipated, okay, why do you need apps on the phone? And it somehow the entire generative AI, this narrative will bring back that forward back again to the developers, right? To the app makers, right? Tomorrow all these apps are going to be powerful, like they mentioned on the Siri, and then tomorrow maybe your smartphone will go appless in certain ways, right? The input mechanism is going to be changed, and what will happen, the amalgamation of all these two will give or drive the entire service engine for Apple in a big way, right? So that's our hypothesis as of now, but happy to if any of you would like to shed some light on these pointers as well.
I think you raise a very good point, bringing Siri into the picture. I think Siri is something. It was one of the key takeaways of the entire Gen AI strategy. We think so. It looks like Siri is going to be very, very powerful, considering that it will be integrated in the developers will start integrating in their apps, and as in when we go forward, Siri is going to be able to do some very, very complex tasks. You might not have to open your apps. You just talk to Siri and it will do things for you. And imagine bringing that power to maybe a smart watch in future, right? And if you have that power in smartwatch in future of it might become a primary way to access your ecosystem, right? So it's as Tarun said, it's a fundamental shift. It's a fundamental shift on both the ways. The first is the entire app ecosystem. How are they going to be accessed? And it could also be a fundamental shift on how are we accessing our phone or the tech around us.
Right, and not just the watches, right? It's also the Macs that we have, the MacBooks, etc. It's all being integrated, and I think that makes it it's so clever what Apple is doing in terms of how it can approach that, how it can get the developer community not just to do an app for your phone, but have it be all encompassing in terms of including your MacBook, in terms of including it, you know, what if it can be done with like AirPods too, you know? So really exciting to see kind of the capabilities, I think, going forward, what will be developed especially for this. And the one thing that I think we get asked a lot is like, how will this affect Apple's hardware strategy going forward, right? So of course we had a big upgrade cycle with the iPhone 12 happening when there was that 4G to 5G transition, which brought a lot of upgrades. And as you guys all know, the smartphone market has been sort of declining over the past couple of years. People have been holding onto their devices a lot longer. The tech has gotten a lot better, so there wasn't really a need to upgrade. But because of this Gen AI aspect, we're really seeing a push, at least from the OEM side, to have a bigger upgrade rate going forward. And we're not necessarily seeing it at the moment happen, this big upgrade cycle, because I think Gen AI isn't as developed as we want it to be that big of a push. But Apple being Apple, how do you guys think that will affect them, especially because they're able to do this more ecosystem approach?
Right. I think that's a very valid question, Maurice. So the entire thing is we call it a super cycle, right? And Apple have seen those super cycle over the years. You have seen one during the 6S, and then we have seen during the 12 from 4G to. So most of them have been very limited to the tech upgrade, like from 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G, or some kind of design form factors. When we have seen big change from the Apple iPhone design 4 and 5 to 6 and 7, and then iPhone 10. Um, so those were this, but now this is something very different. This is not something which will be applicable to all the iPhones overnight. You just upgrade because they mentioned it will start with the iPhone 15 Pros, and the thing is how that will actually impact some of these audience or the users to go to the pro versions. It all depends whether the use cases they are mentioning they kicked off, and then everyone starts talking about it, and suddenly you'll see a bigger upgrade happening, or it will happen over a period of time. Like let's say iPhone 15 Pro, people will upgrade. 16, they may or may not go ahead with the entire range, but let's see, only pros for the 16, and then 17 you'll see the entire lineup. But I think the fundamental question here is uh, is the emergence of these use cases and how well, because today we are talking about certain hardware limitations, right? If you have to run a 7 billion parameters, you need a minimum ram DRAM for that, and it is like 3 GB or 4 GB. But in future, the question is, will those models will run on a similar, maybe on a 2 GB ram, through all these different innovations that are happening, or the compression techniques that are coming. So that's fundamental how the hardware will evolve. That will actually impact a lot of these upgrades. The other thing what we look at is, even if, so we are talking about Gen AI, right? Right now we think that the entire AI strategy will coexist with the Gen AI strategy, right? So you'll still have some of these AI use cases that no longer require the higher processing power will come to some of these iPhones. You might see it could be the older, but those are not typical generative AI use cases. So we think they will like coexist, but then everything will depend on how a particular use case is going to take off, right? Like for example, in 5G, we all know, in 4G everything was more on, we have seen the Ubers of the world and the ride sharing and the everything changed, right, in terms of connectivity. In 5G, we have seen more on the gaming and FWA, but we need to see what is the killer use case that is going to emerge from this Gen AI going forward, and that will impact your device upgrades in future as well.
But at least I think people on the fence, they might upgrade it. It's just
Yeah,
the ones who
to the
have been
pros.
postponed, yeah, they might upgrade it.
And very interesting, you mentioned it's a free, right? And yeah,
Well, yeah, let's talk about then that, it is free for now, but, obviously if you have an integration with like OpenAI, ChatGPT or so, that does cost money. So how do y'all foresee Apple kind of balancing that?
see, so the point is, the entire thing is, then you have developers at one side, right? And you have to compensate them as well too, because developers are putting in the efforts to build all these apps and going forward. So I think the models will change, even the revenue models will change to a certain extent. We can't comment on what Apple's strategy will be like, but if we have to take some cue from what Google is doing, right, during the I/O, we have seen they have repeatedly mentioned about Gemini Advanced, right? Some features will be part of this Gemini Advanced, and then you have this subscription model which is like $20, which has this cloud storage, Google One, and everything coming into. So they are going for that. How Android OEMs are going to charge for it, it's a different thing altogether. But we believe for somehow Apple is more secure because they have this entire service narrative that is coming. So tomorrow, who knows, like you just increase the slight price of a one particular service and that will be taken care of, right? So I think that flexibility Apple has more as compared to someone on the Android camp, but we'll see, because there is a certain cost to add this hardware on top of your flagship. So 12 GB RAM, 16 GB RAM, you need to have the powerful processors that are going to take care of these models. You might need to do this multi-model. We believe that SLMs will be part of it, small language models versus large language models, and then you have the entire developer community on top of it. So yeah, those, and then you have server cost and everything, because processing on the cloud is expensive. You need to like put in more resources for that, but it's still very very early days in terms of the monetization and everything.
But one interesting point is there could be some intersections when you are using Gen AI services and the intersection with the existing services. For example, you are creating a video and you have to put, or maybe a collage or something, and you have to put music in that, and that music comes from Apple Music app. So there will be these subtle intersections also, which might help Apple, bump up their services revenues, maybe not directly from Gen AI, or maybe directly, but who knows? But yes, those intersections will also come into play.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, I think we covered a lot on this kind of quick take on Apple's WWDC. We it's going to be really exciting, I think, to see how Apple is going to develop this ecosystem that they have with Apple Intelligence forward, and also to see how the Android OEMs respond to this, with future announcements, especially, Qualcomm, I think, has a new chip that's really AI focused as well coming out, that came out this year. So really exciting space to be in, and let's try to touch upon a couple more announcements, maybe, coming up in the next couple of months, and move this conversation forward. So thanks a lot for joining me on this call.
Thanks. Thanks, Maurice. Thanks, Varun.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, Maurice.